God help us!
6,000 men stand in mud. They haven't eaten properly in 17 days. Their bowels run with dysentery. Their boots have dissolved into wet rags. They have walked 260 miles through enemy territory on 8 days of rations that ran out a week ago. Dozens die every night from disease alone, not from battle, from rot. Across a freshly plowed field, 36,000 warriors wait. They are fed. They are rested. They wear the finest plate armor that French forges can produce. Behind them sit cartloads of iron chains, already prepared to bind the English prisoners they expect to capture by noon. French nobles argue not about whether they will win, but about who gets to personally seize the English king. The ransom alone will make a man rich for 3 generations. It is the morning of October 25th, 1415, St. Crispin's Day. Everything about this moment is wrong for England. And yet, in the next 6 hours, the French army ceases to exist as a fighting force. Not damaged, not pushed back, destroyed. At least 5,000 French soldiers die on this field before the sun sets. Another 1,500 are captured. The Constable of France falls. The Duke of Alençon falls. 3 dukes, 5 counts, 90 barons, and more than 1,500 knights of the realm. The entire command structure of French nobility falls. Entire family lines are erased in a single morning. Villages across northern France will have no men of fighting age left before winter. English dead, fewer than 400 men. This is Agincourt, the number that does not compute, the result that military historians still reconstruct, debate, and struggle to fully explain 6 centuries later. The battle that should have been a massacre, and was, just not the one anyone predicted. What follows is not a fairy tale about English courage. It is something more precise, more disturbing, and more instructive. It is the story of how an impossible outcome was engineered, step by step, yet volley by volley, pound of mud by pound of mud. The French army at Agincourt didn't stumble into defeat. It marched forward in perfect formation into the most efficiently constructed killing machine the medieval world had ever assembled. And no one, not even the English, fully understood what had just happened until it was over. To understand the paradox of Agincourt, you have to understand what medieval warfare actually is. In 1415, war belongs to knights. A French knight of the era wears between 50 and 70 pounds of articulated plate armor. His helmet alone is thicker than a thumb. His destrier, the trained war horse beneath him, weighs 1,400 pounds and charges at 25 miles per hour. A line of heavy cavalry crossing open ground is not a military maneuver. It is an execution. This is the foundational logic of European warfare for 3 centuries. Numbers of armored horse determine outcomes. Everything else, archers, infantry, terrain, exists to support the charge of heavy cavalry or to absorb it. France has more of this decisive force than any kingdom in Europe. In October 1415, the French army assembles at Rouen with men drawn from across the realm. Northern France contributes the full nobility of Artois, Picardy, Ponthieu, and Normandy. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, commands in person. He has dukes, marshals, and veterans of a dozen campaigns at his side. He has a written battle plan, and he has bombards, early cannon. He has Genoese crossbowmen. He has fresh horses. He has, by the most conservative estimates, 5 times the force he faces. Now look across the field at what he is preparing to destroy. Henry V leaves England in August 1415 with roughly 12,000 men, a legitimate force for the era. But the siege of Harfleur, the coastal town Henry besieges for 5 weeks before taking, bleeds him badly. Dysentery tears through his army. He garrisons the town with 1,200 men and marches north on October 8th with what remains. 6,000 soldiers, maybe a few hundred more, carrying 8 days of rations, walking toward Calais, 260 miles away, through hostile territory. His own advisors plead with him not to go. The rational choice is to sail home from Harfleur and call the campaign a partial victory. Henry says no. He points the army north and walks. The French block every crossing of the Somme River. Henry is forced east, away from the coast, burning days he doesn't have. The rations run out. His men eat raw turnips, unripe fruit, anything they find in empty fields. Dysentery spreads faster with every passing day. On October 24th, scouts return with the news Henry has been dreading. The French army is ahead. The road to Calais is blocked. There is nowhere left to run. By every calculation available to every military mind of 1415, this is where the English army ends. The French are not preparing for a battle. They are preparing for a surrender, a ransom negotiation, a triumph. They order wine brought up to celebrate. And then the rain begins. It rains all night on October 24th. Not a drizzle. A cold, sustained autumn downpour that saturates the freshly ploughed field between the villages of Agincourt and Tramecourt until the soil becomes something between mud and water. The French camp celebrates through the night. Wine flows. Dice games run late. A few commanders make final arguments about formation and order of march. Mostly, they argue about the ransom value of the English king. The English camp is different. Henry walks his lines alone in the dark. No banners, no ceremony, just a king in a plain cloak, moving tent to tent, speaking quietly to men who crouch between their feet and vomit into the mud. He does not make speeches. He makes observations. By midnight, he has made a decision that has no parallel in medieval military doctrine. He chooses this field, not because the terrain is favorable in any traditional sense, but because the forest of Agincourt runs along the left flank and the forest of Tramecourt closes in from the right. Between the two forests, the battlefield narrows to approximately 900 yards wide. A natural funnel. In open ground, 36,000 French troops deploy in multiple lines, envelope flanks, and destroy the English through mass alone. In a 900-yard funnel, 36,000 men cannot spread. They stack, they crowd, they lose their tactical geometry. The ability to maneuver, the decisive advantage of a larger force, disappears the moment the woods close in. Henry has 6,000 men. In a 900-yard corridor, 6,000 men fill the battlefield width. Numbers stop mattering once geography eliminates room to use them. There is one other element Henry understands with a precision that would take Europe another century to appreciate. He has 5,000 longbowmen. The English longbow is not new to French commanders. They have faced it at Crécy in 1346 and at Poitiers in 1356. Both times, the results were catastrophic for French cavalry. Both times, the French army concluded the defeat was a tactical error, a fluke, a specific circumstance unlikely to repeat. They have spent 69 years arriving at the same wrong conclusion. What French doctrine still fails to fully reckon with is the mathematics of what 5,000 trained longbowmen firing in coordinated volleys actually produces. A trained English archer fires 10 to 12 arrows per minute. 5,000 archers firing simultaneously produce 50,000 to 60,000 arrows per minute. The first volley does not need to pierce armor, it needs to terrify horses. A destrier cannot carry enough armor to be arrow-proof at range. A horse struck by 3 or 4 arrows does not die immediately. It panics, it rears, it spins. a 1,400-pound panicked animal crashing through dense, packed infantry formation does more structural damage than any weapon its rider carries. Henry orders his archers to drive sharpened wooden stakes into the ground at an angle in front of their positions. An ancient Roman anti-cavalry measure. Takes an afternoon to prepare. Costs nothing. At dawn on October 25th, Henry moves his entire army forward until they stand within extreme longbow range of the French lines, approximately 300 yards. He is daring the French to charge. For 4 hours, neither side moves. The French commanders hesitate. The mud in front of them is ankle-deep, knee-deep in places. The woods prevent flanking. The English hold slightly higher ground. The battle plan: bombards first, crossbowmen forward. Cavalry on the flanks to sweep the English archers is already compromised by terrain that no one planned for. French nobles grow impatient. Some send servants back to camp to fetch lunch. At approximately 11 in the morning, Henry gives the order. 5,000 bows draw back. The first volley rises. What happens next is not a battle in any traditional sense. It is a mechanism engaging. And it was exactly what it was designed to be. The arrow storm reaches the French line like a wall of sound before it arrives like a wall of iron. The French cavalry on both flanks, the knights designated to sweep around and destroy the English archers, specifically designed into the French battle plan for this purpose, send their horses forward, into the mud, into the stakes, into 50,000 arrows per minute. What happens is not heroic, it is mechanical. Horses sink into mud up to their knees with each stride. Our horses struck by arrows spin, rear, and crash. Horses reach the stakes and impale. Riders fly. Hundreds of pounds of panicking animal plow back through the advancing French infantry behind them, shattering formation before it even reaches the English line. The cavalry attack on both flanks collapses within minutes. The French infantry now begins to advance on foot. 8,000 heavy men-at-arms in plate armor start the walk across 300 yards of plowed mud, and each step pulls a boot downward 6 inches, then 12. The soil is not simply wet. It is freshly tilled earth saturated to liquefaction. Every step across this field costs double the energy of walking on firm ground. A man wearing 60 pounds of plate armor walking 300 yards through this surface arrives at the English line already spent. His visor is down against the arrows. He can barely breathe inside the metal. He can barely see. He cannot fully raise his arms. And the woods are tightening the corridor with every step forward. French formations that begin 900 yards wide compress as they advance. The trees press them closer. By the time the front ranks reach the English line, the French are no longer a military formation. They are a crushing, suffocating mass of metal and flesh and desperation. Men in the third rank push men in the second rank. Men in the second rank push men in the first rank. Men in the first rank, exhausted, arrows struck, are barely standing, cannot raise their weapons. There is no room to swing a sword, no room to move, no room to fall safely. Men fall. They cannot rise. More men fall on top of them. Some drown in less than 12 inches of mud. The pile of French men-at-arms grows, in certain sections of the line, 4 bodies high. Henry's men-at-arms hold the line. They need only hold. The French are completing their own destruction. The English archers drop their longbows. They pull out lead mallets, our daggers, hatchets. These are not gentle weapons. These are not ceremonial. These men have trained since childhood to draw a 150-pound bow 10,000 times a year. The left arm of an English archer is thicker and longer than the right, physically deformed by decades of repetition. They are not soft. They are not tired. They have done nothing yet but stand and shoot. They move through the piled bodies methodically. A lead mallet to the crown of a plate helmet does not need to penetrate the steel. The shock transmits through the metal to the skull inside. The slaughter takes less than 2 hours. When the killing stops, the field does not look like a battlefield. It looks like a drainage ditch. At least 5,000 French soldiers are dead. Among them, Charles d'Albret, Constable of France, the Duke of Alençon, the Duke of Brabant, the Count of Nevers. More than 1,500 knights identified by their coats of arms, and hundreds more unidentifiable. The bailiffs of 9 major northern towns, often alongside their sons, their brothers, their supporters. In the words of historian Juliette Barker, the battle cut a great swathe through the natural leaders of French society. English dead, fewer than 400. But before the last body is counted, Henry V makes a decision that the next 6 centuries will not forgive or fully explain. There are 1,500 French prisoners on the field. Under medieval convention, this is a fortune. These are ransoms. The Duke of Orléans represents a sum that could fund a campaign. Marshal Boucicaut, captured alive, is worth years of English tax revenue. The aggregate value of 1,500 noble prisoners is staggering, the kind of wealth that defines legacies. Then Henry receives a report. A French force is moving toward the English rear. The English camp, unguarded, filled with supplies, horses, servants, is under attack. And Henry faces a calculation no medieval king wants to face out loud. He has 1,500 prisoners. He has perhaps 400 men still capable of effective combat. The dead surrounding those prisoners include 5,000 French soldiers. Weapons lie everywhere within arm's reach. If the prisoners arm themselves and turn, even half of them, Henry's exhausted force cannot hold. Henry gives the order. Kill the prisoners. His men-at-arms refuse. Ransoms, fortunes, men who have surrendered under the rules of war. But Henry threatens to hang any man who disobeys. A small group of English archers, men with no financial stake in noble ransoms, carry out the order. The French prisoners die where they kneel. The threat to the English camp turns out to be a raid by local peasants. A minor disturbance, not a military maneuver. The prisoners are already dead. This moment, the prisoner massacre of Agincourt, is the shadow that never leaves the victory. Shakespeare will write around it, and English historians will minimize it for centuries. French historians will not. But it reveals something about Henry V that the triumph of the longbow obscures. He is not a figure of romantic heroism. He is a military calculator of extraordinary precision and zero sentiment. Every decision at Agincourt, the terrain selection, the stake placement, the timing of the advance, the first volley, reflects the same cold engineering as the order to execute unarmed men. Our Agincourt is won not by valor alone. It is won by a king who treats warfare as a problem with a solution and removes every variable that threatens the solution, including 1,500 lives. Back in France, the shock registers like a seismic event. Entire noble families are erased in the male line. The bailiffs of 9 major towns are dead. In Artois, Picardy, and Normandy, there are villages where every man of fighting age is simply gone. The French nobility loses a generation in a single October morning. France cannot mount another serious offensive for years. Henry returns to London as the most celebrated king in English memory. The road to the Treaty of Troyes, where Henry will be formally named heir to the French throne, the most extraordinary diplomatic achievement of the era, runs directly through this muddy field. For the first time in a century of the 100 Years' War, England does not just raid France. It threatens to absorb it. because of 6,000 starving men and the rain that fell the night before. But the consequences of Agincourt reach far beyond the politics of 1415, because what breaks on that field is not just a French army. Agincourt does not end the Age of the Night, but it cracks it beyond repair. For 3 centuries, the military doctrine of Western Europe rests on a single assumption. Armored cavalry decides battles. Numbers of mounted knights determine outcomes, and infantry is support. Terrain is a consideration, but the decisive force is always the charge of heavy horse. Crécy in 1346 challenges this. Poitiers in 1356 challenges it again. Agincourt in 1415 delivers the challenge in numbers so extreme, 6-to-1 odds, reversed, that the old assumption cannot survive the arithmetic. 5,000 French dead, 300 English dead. What European military thinkers spend the next century working through is not a tactical question. It is a philosophical one. What beats a knight? Agincourt's answer is not the longbow. The longbow had existed for decades. The French had faced it twice before and returned to the same cavalry-first doctrine. Crécy didn't kill the knight. Poitiers didn't kill the knight. What Agincourt demonstrates, what takes the next generation of military thinkers time to fully absorb, is that the longbow did not work alone. It worked inside a system. Terrain selection as a weapon, our arrow psychology as crowd control, exhaustion as a tactical tool, stakes as anti-cavalry technology that costs nothing, the narrow field that erases numerical superiority before the first arrow flies. The insight that spreads through European armies after Agincourt is not train more archers. It is more unsettling than that. The battle that looked like a miracle was actually engineered. Every element that appeared like luck was a decision. Every advantage that seemed accidental was constructed. This thinking, battle as system design rather than brute force application, filters into Swiss pike formations, into the Spanish tercio doctrine of the next century, into the disciplined infantry tactics that will eventually make heavy cavalry a supporting arm rather than the decisive one. The professional armies of the modern era trace a direct intellectual lineage through these ideas. The knight does not die at Agincourt, but the belief that overwhelming numerical superiority in cavalry guarantees victory, regardless of terrain, conditions, or enemy preparation, is mortally wounded in this field on October 25th, 1415. There is a second legacy, harder to measure, that runs directly into the present day. Consider what actually defeated the French army. Not just the mud, not just the arrows. The French commanders at Agincourt know they outnumber the English 6-to-1. They know their men are better fed, but better rested, better equipped, and fighting on home soil. Every measurable metric of military advantage belongs to them. This certainty, this numerical confidence, causes them to stop analyzing the actual situation and start assuming the inevitable outcome. They crowd the front lines because every noble wants the honor of the capture. They push the schedule because waiting feels like weakness. They ignore the mud because mud has never stopped French cavalry before. They dismiss the terrain because terrain has never mattered more than numbers before. They march into a corridor that converts their advantage into uselessness and call it a battle plan. Ask yourself, how many times across 6 centuries of human conflict has the larger force lost for exactly this reason? Not from lack of strength, from the unshakable conviction that the outcome is already decided, so there is nothing left to calculate. This failure appears in corporate boardrooms when dominant companies ignore disruption because the market share numbers say they cannot lose. It appears in military planning rooms when conventional superiority creates blindness to asymmetric threats. It appears wherever the size of the force on paper substitutes for actual observation of the ground. The The French army at Agincourt had every reason to win. They stopped thinking the moment they counted their men. They marched into the mud anyway. 6,000 men stand in mud on the morning of October 25th, 1415. Sick, starving, outnumbered. By every reasonable military measure, the day is already decided before it begins. They win. Not through a miracle, not through divine favor, though Henry will claim it. They win because one side looks at the actual ground beneath their feet, the mud, the funnel, the stakes, the exhaustion building with every French step forward, and builds a system from it. The other side counts its men, declares the outcome certain, and advances. The numbers drown in the mud. Agincourt asks a question that every century since has struggled to answer honestly. How many defeats in history, how many collapses, how many catastrophic miscalculations are not failures of strength, but failures of certainty, of the unshakable conviction that the outcome is already decided, so the analysis can stop? Think about that. Not as a question about medieval France, as a question about every situation where the advantage seems obvious and the preparation ends. The field at Agincourt is 600 years silent. The cognitive pattern that covered the French army's thinking is not. What do you see when you look at Agincourt now? Is the real lesson the weapon, the terrain, the king's ruthlessness? Or is it the moment the French army stopped looking at the actual ground beneath their feet? Leave that answer in the comments. The most interesting ones say something about the present, not just the past. The last image from that October morning is not a triumph. It is a field gone quiet. The mud holds more armor than men. Somewhere to the north, a starving army begins the final walk toward Calais. They have won something they were never supposed to win. They don't fully know yet what it means. Neither for a very long time will anyone else.